Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Bear Arms in Scottsdale, Arizona, taking a look at a very cool, very rare shotgun from their reference collection. This is a Young repeating arms shotgun designed by one Charles Sparrow Young. Now, Charles Young was born in 1866, and by the 1890s, he was a serious championship-level trap shooter. He was a sponsored professional shooter in the 1890s. He worked for the Peterson Arms Company and the Peters Arms Company, the Peters Ammo Company, and he was also a mechanical tinkerer. So at first he started patenting various small features, things like he had a release trigger mechanism that he patented. Release triggers were sort of a niche shotgun thing at the time. I guess maybe to a certain extent they are still today, but the idea was it's like the back half of a binary trigger. So when you pull the trigger, it does nothing. When you let go of the trigger, that's when the gun fires. The idea was you're using less muscle to just release the trigger than to pull it, so you're less likely to, bump your aim. You'll get a cleaner release with a release trigger. There are some potential safety issues, like what if you pull the trigger and then decide you don't want to fire? But we'll leave that aside. Young patented a release trigger mechanism, and he also had an idea to patent his own full gun, to design his own gun. He patented this in 1901 and 1902, two separate patents covering different aspects of it. And in 1901, he set up the Young Repeating Arms Company to manufacture this. So what was Young going to do that would make his gun special and worth buying above everything else out there on the market? Well, essentially, he wanted to combine the best elements of both double-barreled guns and single-barreled repeating guns. Now, remember that this is specifically for trap. It's a shotgun game that requires a maximum of 2 shots at any given time. So there isn't a need, in fact, it would almost be a liability to have a larger than 2-round capacity. He's very specifically marketing this as a 2-round gun. But he can give you 1 barrel with an action length like a double-barrel gun, where you don't need any space behind the receiver, like you would in a pump gun to pull the shell back outward from the chamber. And if I hit the release here, the way his works is you pull forward on the barrel and the action, and it stores a second round. So you got 1 round in the barrel, and you got a second round down here in the action. And you get a nice, svelte, short, granted it has like a 30-inch barrel on it, but that's standard for the game. Gives you a nice, short, svelte action. I can definitely see the potential. Anyway, he sets up the Young Repeating Arms Company in 1901. 1902, they start making parts, and they're like, this is a serious enterprise. They lease a factory. It's a 4-story factory. They are doing all of the work in-house. They're making their own barrels. They're making their own furniture. They have an engraver in-house, and a bunch of these guns are engraved. Their estimate was they had about $20 of cost in each gun between labor and materials, and they were planning to sell them for between $75 and $250 depending on the grade, how fancy you wanted it. So this was a serious business endeavor. They had a good business plan. They were making a lot of parts. Some parts they made thousands of before it all fell apart. And in early 1903, they started a marketing campaign to sell the gun. Things were looking good. They actually went out and purchased 7 acres of land to build their own factory on, to presumably replace the leased facility that they had started out with. And then 2 weeks later, the whole company fell into receivership. So before we talk about what ended up happening with these guys, let's take a closer look at how this very unusual, very cool, interesting gun works. All right, so there's the gun. We have a decent bit of engraving. It seems like they all pretty much have at least some level of engraving on them. If I flip this around, we have some markings on the top rib of the barrel. The Young Repeating Arms Company, Columbus, Ohio. And on the bottom of the receiver, we have patent dates here, and the serial number. This is 1102. They started at either 1000 or 1001, and serial numbers ran to somewhere in the low 1100s. I've also seen reference to an 1194. Unclear exactly how that one came about. Some of these may have been numbered out of sequence. It's not entirely certain. The form here is actually, if I was going to compare it to anything, it would be kind of like the modern high-end Cosmes, where it sure looks like a single-shot sort of break-action gun, but it actually holds multiple rounds. So we have a little lever right here. That's our slide release, essentially. I pull that back, and I can pull the action forward and apart. By the way, one of the other claimed benefits here is that this could very easily chamber anything from a 2 5/8 shell up to a 3-inch level shell. I don't think I would fire a 3-inch Magnum out of one of these today, but it was a system to easily have long shells. This is our second round, so this is sort of our follower, which drops down into the bottom of the action there, spring-loaded. So, right, I actually have a couple of dummy shells, so I can show you exactly how this works. We start with is putting our second shell in that lifter. And then it sits, if I don't mess it up, there we go. It sits right there with the rim in that notch, and then it locks down in the bottom of the action. You can see this block here snaps over the top of the rim. So that's shell number 2. Shell number 1, I then just manually load into the chamber, close the action. I will then fire that shell. Once it's fired, I can open the action. You'll see we have an extractor that holds the shell, the empty shell here on the breech face. This side is a spring-loaded ejector that's going to push in this direction. So as soon as I open it fully, that top shell pops off. The carrier then lifts the second shell up. As I close this, that peg is actually connected to that little holder. So that's going to release, there we go, release the second cartridge, chamber it. There we go, lock the gun shut, fire it a second time, and repeat the process. So this actually works a bit better if you're a little less gentle with it. So if I just run this like I ought to, fire, first round, second, it ejects nicely, and then presents the lifter ready to reload. Again, this is intended specifically for shotgun games that require 2 rounds in the gun, so there's no need to have space for a third. So to take this apart, I want to first separate that connecting rod, and then this little lever right here, right there, is connected to our locking block. So I'm going to push that up, and then I can pull the barrel assembly off the receiver assembly. So this lug right here is the locking lug, and it's connected by spring to this, which pushes it down. So this lug right here is the locking, essentially locking lug, and it's going to lock into this notch in the barrel assembly. Note that to adjust the headspace, you loosen this screw right there. You can slide this piece, which is removable, slightly side to side, which adjusts it forward and back just incrementally. So that's how you set your headspace. There's a second locking catch right back here that will catch in this bolt to prevent you from pulling the barrel assembly off the gun completely when you cycle it. So in order to disassemble this, what we're doing is lifting this lug up manually, and right now it's locked in place. It won't go far enough up. When I either pull the trigger or hold the slide release, that allows that lug to go all the way down. So that's what you have to do there to get it completely out. This roller right here is what's actually doing that job for us. So there's a little V-notch. Let's see if you can see it. You can kind of see it. There's a little V-hook right there at the end of my finger. That rests in this little notch right there. So once once this locking block is able to go fully down, pulling the handle forward, this roller pushes this lever up, which drops the locking block and allows you to open the gun. Now there's another feature here. When I hold the lifter all the way down, I've got this little button that's exposed through the bottom of the gun. This one, it's frozen up. This is you're supposed to be able to push this, I think, forward or lock it in place. Essentially, this allows you to lock the follower in the downward position so that if you only want to shoot 1 round at a time, this stays down and just doesn't get in your way. But again, it's not quite working right on this example. I can do one additional bit of disassembly, and that is to take this front handguard off. All right, there we go. It's just one screw holding that on. Now there's some weird stuff in here, as you can see there. This whole assembly slides back and forth, and there's a bushing pin that holds it in. There's a second one up here. It's a little bit unclear to me what all of this is here to do, but there we go, 2 bushing pins that hold this onto that. There is some documentation on the Youngs. There's a really good old article that was published on these that mentions that there was an optional feature that would have a special, essentially an extra safety in it, where you would have to apply something like 3 to 5 pounds of pressure to pull the pump handle forward. And I suspect, well, and this article says that those parts were generally not installed in the guns. And I suspect that's what's going on here, that this, this ability to slide back and forth was connected to having a spring or something built into the guns as part of that additional feature that just didn't make it, because these were all assembled from the parts that were available. So actually, let me tell you about that. Let's talk about what ended up happening to the Young Repeating Arms Company. It's not entirely clear exactly what dumped the company into bankruptcy. Probably, it seems, there were some investors who had promised money and then didn't actually come forward with the money, and then bills came due and they had no money, and boom, company's in receivership. There were a couple of lawsuits back and forth between Young and some of the other board members and officers of the company. Young and the secretary, who was also the treasurer, were on one side and the other officers were on the other, and essentially both lawsuits kind of negated each other and they kind of settled both at the same time. The company's assets were sold off, so there was an analysis done, an assessment done of what's the value of all this stuff, and the assessor figured that the company was worth about $31,000 as an operating concern with a product that you could, buy the company and have it actually do stuff, or about $13,000 just the total value of its machinery and the stuff it had manufactured and that sort of thing. It went looking for potential buyers to pay off the investors, the creditors of the company. It wasn't until 1904 that they actually found one, and that was the Sears company, Sears Roebuck company, who ended up buying the Young Repeating Arms Company and all of its assets for $8,000. So they got really a quite good deal on it. Although what Sears wanted to do was just strip Young of its useful tools and price and things like stock blanks. Sears had its own gun manufacturing concern, and they took all the valuable, useful tools and machines and raw materials and sent them off there. They assembled as many guns as they could out of the remnants of the parts that Young had manufactured. That we don't know exactly how many, but about 125 guns total. So this is a really quite scarce gun today. 125 of these are really all that ever actually came out. As I said, they're all missing, none of them are quite perfectly complete. It doesn't appear they really ever had butt plates done. But anyway, they're really cool guns. Oh, by the way, Sears owned those 125 guns. They were marketed in Sears' 1905 catalog, where they were sold for $15 a piece. You remember, the company had $20 invested in them. Sears just wanted to blow them out, get rid of them. They're all 12 gauge, and that was the end of it. They sold off, and then they're gone. Now, Charles Young continued to shoot, continued to be an outstanding championship level trap shooter. In fact, I have found record that in 1950, which is a year before he died, he was 84 years old in 1950 and shot a perfect 100 round of trap. Like, dang, that's quite impressive. So it probably soured him on manufacturing endeavors for a while, or possibly forever, but it didn't stop him from being a really good shooter. Oh. Anyway, big thanks to Bear Arms for giving me access to this very cool, very rare early repeating shotgun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.